apart from Patrick, there might be.
Yeah, we've got Richard Leppington's in there as well. Morning, Richard.
Great.
Yes, good morning, Patrick. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, you are now live, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much and welcome everybody. This is the Gloucestershire Economic Growth Joint Committee. As you all know, it's being broadcast live on YouTube as well. I'm sure there's an audience of literally tens. So I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting this morning. The couple of things, a bit of housekeeping, as we all know. I'm sure you're all quite used to this technology now. But please, if you're not speaking, then put yourselves on mute, because that will help the meeting run smoothly. If you do want to speak, please try and raise your hand in the participants section of WebEx, so I can see who's raised their hand. As you know, we won't know what order necessarily they're in, but I will try and call you through. If for any reason I haven't noticed you, perhaps you could wave your hand at the screen. But saying that, there are a lot of participants, so I can't actually see everybody on one screen anyway. So it does make it slightly awkward, but just make yourself known if you need to speak and I haven't noticed you. We will be asking the various participants during the discussion to come in. We're on a bit of a deadline because there is an MHCLG meeting at 12 for all the leaders and chief execs. So I'm sure a lot of you will be leaving then. So if we can get the meeting wrapped up by 12, that would be very useful. So please try and keep your bits tight and precise and to the point, and so we can move the meeting forward. I think that's probably all we need to say to start things moving. So we'll actually start the meeting proper now, and we'll start with apologies. I think we do have some apologies from Councillor Tony Dale, and Joe Harris is going to join the meeting as his deputy. Has Joe arrived, or are we still waiting? I think we're still waiting for Joe.
Still waiting.
I don't think there are any other apologies. Do we have any others, Joe?
No other apologies. Doina from Stroud District Council has not joined us at the moment. So, oh, Doina, there you are. Welcome.
Oh, hi, Doina.
Lovely to see you. So, no other apologies.
Terrific. Right, item number 2 is the minutes of the last meeting, and that was the meeting on the 3rd of June. That was also a virtual meeting. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Join us now. We've just started, Joe, so we're just doing the minutes now. Is everybody happy that the minutes were a true and accurate record of the meeting? Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? Can't see any hands, can't hear anybody. So I'll take that if we're all happy as confirmation that the minutes are a true and accurate record, and we're quite happy with that.
Patrick, do you want to just remind everybody about the raising of the hands now that we've got everybody here? Just a quick.
All right, yeah. There are, as I said, there are a lot of participants on the meeting. I can't actually see everybody on one screen. If you do want to speak at any moment, if you could use the raise the hand function on WebEx, and I'll come to you. If I've missed you, then either raise your hand or say hello or something, try and get my attention, and I'll bring you in. Right, item number 3 is declarations of interest. Does anybody have a declaration of interest? Nope. Excellent. Then we'll move straight on to item number 4. And this is the Gloucestershire Economic Growth Scrutiny Report, Planning for Economic Recovery. And this was the meeting on the 2nd of July, recently, chaired by Councillor Kevin Cromwell. So at this point, I'll ask Kevin if he'll come in and just give us a brief update and report on that scrutiny meeting. Kevin?
Thanks, Patrick. Morning, all. You have the report in front of you, so obviously, because we're on time, I feel that obviously it's fairly concise, so you can all see it, and there's not an awful lot to talk on. Can I just point out to you, though, the three arrows underneath item 1 that I'd like you to just pay attention to, really, which is how are you going to involve the scrutiny committee on the economic recovery process. So it's how we are going to be involved in this, and that's a question that I asked last time at the meeting. How is the scrutiny committee going to be kept informed of the work being undertaken by the joint committee and the G first? That's another one that we wanted to know how it's going to feed into us. And what contribution can the scrutiny committee make towards the recovery process? If there's any contribution that we can help with, we are quite willing to do so, and I will leave it at that, Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
Any questions, if there are any?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I'll just briefly say I think scrutiny obviously is vitally important as part of any council function. So to have a good, strong scrutiny committee taking part helps make better decisions, I always think. So we will do our best to make sure the scrutiny committee are kept well abreast of developments. Today is about trying to bring all of our plans together so we have a sort of cohesive approach across the county and make sure that we're all working together. And I think obviously scrutiny is going to play an important part in analysing and looking at some of those details. I don't know, Mike, do you want to say anything about how we bring in scrutiny and keep them part of the process?
I think it might be something to have a conversation at the end of the discussion this morning. Clearly, scrutiny have a major function in terms of monitoring progress and being a critical friend to the committee in terms of the plans that the committee might have, and also about areas where we can best collaborate together across the county. So I think in the plan making mode at the moment, we're still in early days. So I think that's the scrutiny committee's role in terms of monitoring progress and making sure and commenting around that progress would be helpful. I think in terms of the scrutiny committee and keeping them informed, certainly the officer group will work with the committee to make sure that the scrutiny committee is aware of what the joint committee are doing. And then, of course, there's Kevin's own liaison with the committee itself as well. So very much a moving feast at the moment for recovery planning, and I think the committee's role will no doubt develop over time. Thank you, Chair.
Terrific, thank you, Mike. And I just reassure you, Kevin, that obviously as we're both chairs, I think we both need to keep in close contact throughout this process as well. So at any time, feel free to call me or whatever anyway, and we can make sure we're working closely together. Does anybody else have any questions for Kevin on the scrutiny report? Or comments? No, I can't see any hands. So, right, terrific. We'll move on then to item number 5. And this is planning for Gloucestershire economic recovery process. And I'll invite Mike Dawson once again as chair of the senior officer group to open up the discussion and give us a little brief report and set things moving. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. This report really is a simple introductory report to this morning's discussion, following on from the discussions we had at the last meeting. At the last meeting, I think it's fair to say that our recovery planning was yet to be developed across the county. So it was a first introduction to the process, and also we had a really good presentation from G First LEP about the LEP's recovery planning at that point. I think the committee agreed basically that we would come back to this and have a further discussion. This meeting is the start of those further discussions. And I think importantly, the committee decided that it would act as a principal coordinating body to collaborate and coordinate work across the county where that was necessary and appropriate to make the best use of our activities together. So this morning, there's a series of very short touch base presentations on our planning. Our recovery planning across the county has gone forward and being developed to the next stage. I think it's probably worth saying, Chair, that we are still at an early stage in the process, and things will be developing in the coming weeks and months as we go forward, and therefore our plans may need to change and be adopted or adapted rather as we go forward. The purpose of this morning really again was to look at our plans as we've worked them forward, and then in the report in paragraphs 2-3 there's a list of things we're going to do this morning, and that was about sharing plan content and looking at a best practice, also trying to learn from the recovery plans outside the county and basically and see if there's anything we can pick up from there. And Lisa will deal with that a little bit later on. Look at gaps in our plans, things where we may learn from each other and think, well, actually, we could do to put this in. But importantly, also exploring areas where we can work together and where it would be useful to do so. I think in terms of the other issues in there, it's around working together and considering the need for approach for collaboration on funding, where that might be the case, and looking at our next steps, Chair. But the main point really this morning was just to explore what our plans were. We've circulated a template which within the reports pack, which gives details of the plans that we've got. After the meeting, we will circulate links to published plans. Not every member organisation around the table this morning has actually formally published their plans, and therefore it's difficult for us to publish those before they were published by the host organisation. So we've done it by template. I hope that's useful and people have had a chance to look at that, and that will feed and support our discussions this morning. So that's it from me in terms of opening the section. And the only thing I would say is that it still feels early days to me in terms of the recovery planning and particularly around the medium to longer term planning that we've got. But a discussion this morning I think would be very useful for everybody. So back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and I think the sort of activities of this week regarding Spain just shows how fluid we do need to be able to react to things pretty quickly in this very changing times. Okay, well, we'll move on then to Dev Chakraborty to give us his G1st LEP report. Dev.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. I will keep this short and sweet. As you'll have seen, the LEP has produced 3 reports as part of our suite of recovery documents. A sector analysis report, which comes out of our task force and all our business groups, an economic modelling report, and then the recovery plan with all its interventions. And I have to say, we really have pulled out the stops to get these documents, particularly the sector analysis, the rich business intelligence that will then help all the local authorities with your place-based recovery plans. We circulated a press release with our recovery plan documents last week, received quite a bit of positive coverage across the media and from the business community. And we've shared directly with Scrutiny Panel all reports already, also shared them with our 6 local MPs and central government departments, BEIS and MHCLG. So that's really all I wanted to say in positioning where we are. Conscious we want to give as much time as possible for members to have a discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dev. Unless anybody wants to come in immediately, I think we'll just go straight through to the each of the districts' reports. So we start with Cheltenham and Gareth Edmondson. I think you're going to.
Actually, Chair, I think it's me.
Oh, you're going to do it, Steve. Okay. So
sorry to disappoint you. Yeah, just a few highlights, hopefully. Yeah, just say in terms of our recovery strategy, we initially published a draft in May and then did some work with both partners and collected other feedback, having published it, and produced an updated version in July, which obviously, hopefully, people had a chance to look at. In that process, we both strengthened the climate change theme, because I think all the decisions we're taking need to be in the context of the impact on climate change, because that clearly is still a huge issue. And also emphasise the value, particularly in Cheltenham, of culture to the economy and how we actually maximise the value of that. One of the things that's going on in parallel, which again we've alluded to in what we've put in here, is that the Cheltenham Development Task Force, which has been going for 10 years, both Graham Garbutt as independent chair and Jeremy Williamson as the MD, had indicated that after 10 years they thought it may be time to move on. And so we've taken the opportunity to reformat that into a recovery task force. And I'm pleased to say that Diane Savoury has agreed to be the independent chair of that. Hopefully that's still the case, despite us spelling her name wrong in our submission today. But anyway, we're also currently looking at the membership around the table. So I think we very much value the public-private format of the task force, and we're looking at replicating that, but maybe with slightly different individuals around the table, which is going on at the moment. And we've given that an initial 18-month period because, one, as a recovery, after 18 months, we hopefully judge whether it's adding value or not. But also that's in parallel with this committee, because obviously, as we know, we extended our lifetime for 18 months. And so we can understand how this fits in with the city region board, etc., and how all that works together after an 18-month period. In terms of our key priorities, what we've now branded as the Golden Valley Project, which is Cyber Central, west of Cheltenham, however you might know it. We've now chosen our top 6 development partners from the list that was submitted a couple of weeks ago, so I think we're making good progress on that. Clearly, we'll hopefully whittling that down to 1 through the period of the autumn when we can then publish who that is. But much wider, I think this is a really massive opportunity, particularly for young people's employment, and we'd all have a role in making sure that our young people are skilled up to take advantage of this project, because in Cheltenham alone, we now have 11 times the national average of cyber-based businesses, and clearly this can massively go across our area, hopefully. And finally, in terms of these sort of innovation and flexibility, I think we like to think we've been innovative and flexible in things like the high street layout and planning and licensing, etc. And I know other colleagues will be doing the same. It's equally clear that we need to know who's leading on these things, because flexibility and innovation can turn into a bit of a shambles if we're not thinking it through. So it's getting that balance between the rapid response and who's leading on what, which I think no doubt we'll come back to. That's all from me, Chair. Thanks.
Terrific, thank you, Steve. Rather move on to Cotswolds. Philip, is that you or?
It is me. Yes, thanks. Just a quick few updates. And one of the key things that we've done at Cotswolds is leadership took a decision to provide funding so we could appoint a dedicated lead for economic development, which we haven't in the past. And Paul James is now our lead for that. We're doing 3 key pieces of work in parallel at the moment. Is producing a recovery plan for the district as a whole, but specific focus of that work is around the economy. Also producing a council plan to identify new priorities and producing a green economic growth plan. So there's a lot happening in parallel together. In terms of opportunities around recovery, is certainly want to focus around agri-tech. Also reading the other submissions, looking at how we can support cyber in terms of maybe satellite sites within our district. Town centres, we've commissioned some work from maybe around enabling our businesses to be more digitally and socially media aware. And again, around a campaign about local shopping. Green technologies, opportunities we've got. And then particularly looking at a sustainable and environmentally friendly tourism. We've got issues obviously around that sector of the economy, but we weren't totally dominated by overseas visitors. So it's very much about how do we capitalise on the staycation side of it. In terms of collaborations, real themes came out of all the different ones. We've been looking at building data sets, and really it makes sense to have those as county-wide gatherings. So we've got an understanding of that. Funding, where are those funding opportunities and how can we collaborate around understanding those and bidding for them? The digital landscape and rural connectivity is something that's an issue, and I'm sure not just for us, around how do we improve capabilities around that, but also how do we enable younger people to get to services and facilities, and that's something for older generation as well. Skills, if we're having sectors of the economy, we've got high levels of furloughed workers. if they don't return to employment, where are those opportunities of the future? And again, where can we collaborate across the county for that? And then generally enabling sustainable growth. How do we enable sectors of the economies to get going quickly, and certainly involved in the project around barriers to development and how we enable housing development to take place. So a proactive approach to collaboration. And just listening to the news today about government initiatives around cycling and walking, certainly as a county, there's a great opportunity for us to promote the offer of about connecting with safe reopening of the high streets, but also how do you connect across the county as a whole through our cycling and walking networks. So that's the main updates from the Cotswolds.
Thank you, Philippa. Right, I'll move on to Forest of Dean. Has Pete managed to get in, or? Nope, don't think so. So
he's passed it back to me to update you.
He has, right. So it's back to you then, Philippa.
Yes, we had a quick call. Well, his mobile phone was working fine earlier, so he got hold of me. Yeah. So issues for the Forest of Dean is there have been issues around plummeting numbers in terms of footfall to the high street, and also noticed that the market traders haven't been returning. There have been some real positive innovations, though, in the face of adversity around businesses working together to do local click and collect initiatives. Sectors of the economy that are really badly affected is around the visitor hospitality sector, which is about 8% of the economy, but also manufacturing is 27%, and again, high levels of furloughing. So real concerns around loss of employment and the need for retraining, and also that support for startups. And again, where do we work with the growth hubs and others to support that? There's a lot of work going on in the forest around regeneration projects, which are really seen as being opportunities for recovery. And they have been fortunate enough to get significant funding in place for some of those, but again, would be looking for how we access new funding streams to enable those initiatives that have already been identified to get going. Again, it's a great location in terms of work from anywhere, which is one of the LEP's initiatives. And again, the cycling and walking initiatives announced by central government are again something to capitalise on. And we're looking at a call for a county-wide approach to data collection and also around training. So those are the main themes coming through from the forest.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll go on to Gloucester City Council now. Ian, are you going to present this? Where's Ian?
I am indeed, Chair. Thank you. Three very quick points from me. The first one relates to the initial short-term response of Gloucester. In keeping with many other colleagues, we've established a task force chaired by a new cabinet member, Economic Recovery and Growth cabinet member, with a focus on probably 12-18 month period, immediate response to the challenges. Of course, as you'd expect, relationships with the bid, introducing initiatives, managing those initiatives, and finding ways to utilise the Reopening High Streets Fund creatively, rather than just have the city full of stickers and signs. Medium-term, longer-term vision, though, for the city will be held by the City Centre Commission, new commission being established by the city, establishing a 10-year business plan, and the focus, of course, being the repurposing city centres, high streets, something that we're all facing. The third point I'd like to make, the last point, relates to the importance of continuing the regeneration activity, and I think Philip has just mentioned that as well. We're very heavily focused still on the delivery of our major generation schemes, which all have a role in supporting the future economy of Gloucester. The joint venture, £100 million joint venture at King's Quarter, perhaps being the most significant example, but there are many others. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Stroud District Council. So is this Brendan or Doina, are you?
Yes, Chair, it's me, Brendan. I'll be addressing this one. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So Stroud District Council and Stroud as a place, our approach to recovery was set out in a document approved at our Strategy and Resources Committee back in June, on the 18th of June, and that established a series of principles, chief among which was really about listening and engaging with our business community and our communities of place in general. We've established 4 interrelated work streams: economy, market towns, and rural vitality is one of those. Other ones which relate closely to it in terms of climate change, housing, and community resilience. Highlight a few of the key priorities in as far as the economy goes. I think, firstly, just to mention different and distinctive market towns that characterise our districts. Short-term changes, of course, around the high street, the physical changes, but also working with our parish and town councils. We've had some really successful engagement events with them and on short-term changes, but also working with them on a longer-term strategy to, if you like, redefine the role of those market towns into the longer term. So that's a really high priority for us. You won't be surprised to hear me say that canal regeneration it remains a big priority for us, and we see that as a really big opportunity and catalyst for economic, environmental, and social regeneration along that whole corridor. So some key sites along there, including Brimscombe Port itself, but also some smaller but really significant tricky regeneration sites, some of which are in council ownership, many of which are not, but which present a big opportunity and a challenge for the district. Climate change is a big opportunity for us, as well as obviously a huge challenge. And that's a thread running through everything, really. Central to our emerging local plan, but also part in terms of economy. A green business is a big feature in our longer term recovery. So we obviously have the Berkeley Green development, but also things like the emerging proposed eco park at Junction 13 on the motorway, and also thinking about our smaller businesses, which characterise well over 80% of our business community is under 10 employees. How can we encourage green growth, if you like to coin a phrase that someone else used a few moments ago? So climate change and green growth is a big priority for us in our recovery. Retrofitting of properties as well. I know this is something that's mentioned in the LEP strategy, but as a landlord of over 5,000 properties, this is a really important priority for us as a landlord to be focusing on, not just for climate change reasons, but also in terms of skills development and growing that sector of our economy, which is going to be instrumental in transforming our existing housing stock, be that in council or social ownership or in private ownership. So we really feel like that's got to be a big priority for Stroud, but also for the whole of Gloucestershire. I think I'll stop there, the Chair, if that's okay, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of our priorities around recovery. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you, Brendan. Right, Tewkesbury, Rob Weaver.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a very high-level strategic overview of our recovery plan. Firstly, our recovery plan dovetails and aligns very closely with our council plan, our 2020 to 24 council plan, and the 6 key priorities there, which are finance and governance, sustainable environment, garden towns, housing and communities, customers first, and economic development. The benefits of aligning those 2 documents means that we can use the existing governance arrangements and our portfolio holders in particular to identify which specific areas of recovery they're best suited to help us support as a council as we move forward. In terms of our 3 top locality-specific issues, I mean, clearly, as a largely rural authority, we've recognised that high levels of staff have been furloughed in relation to tourism and hospitality, and we'll be focusing particularly on how we can support those groups. And like a lot of the other districts, have already initiated lots of work around high street reopening and recovery. We've also identified, and again, this is very important to us at Tewkesbury, that there's been significant changes in advanced manufacturing, in particular the aerospace industries, and the fact these industries are unlikely to ever be the same again. So for us, reskilling and retraining, particularly lots of staff currently involved in those service areas, is going to be very important to us, both locally and regionally. And clearly also our response phase has highlighted the issues around social isolation and vulnerable groups. So we'll be working very closely with partners and through our Tewkesbury locality partnership and contacts with NHS and CCG to be making sure we're addressing how we transition some of those groups to longer term support measures that were so effective during response, so we can support them moving forward. Key areas in terms of collaboration that we would see: cyber, clearly, aerospace and advanced manufacturing, as I've already mentioned. Training and apprenticeships is going to be really important to us as we look to reskill lots of individuals who have obviously been caught within the furlough scheme and as a result of COVID. Data collection and analysis is going to be really important to help shape up what services we as a local authority will be offering and how we offer those. Low carbon economy is clearly going to be really important as we look to move into recovery. So that really sets out how our plan is shaped around our council plan, what some of our key response areas are going to be, and where we see the key areas for collaboration. So again, I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's great. Right now, to try and bring a sort of overarching view to this from Gloucestershire County Council, I'll ask Colin Chick to come in and give us a brief summary of our report. Colin.
Thanks, Chair. Our original GC recovery report has actually changed slightly in the process of changing. The reason for that was in our original report, recovery report was our plan was really about our roles. We felt were about leading where needed, things like the ATF, the Emergency Active Travel Plan, and identifying issues that need to be picked up collectively, which obviously then led into the next item we thought was important was the coordination role, making sure that having identified those issues that we are coordinated, that we need to work together across the board from the districts right through to the Western Gateway. And that's what we saw our role doing as that conduit, that connectivity, that coordination role. And then obviously feeding from that coordination is the next aspect, which is really important, that collaborative role and collaboration, working together, drive the agenda forward. For us to take a supportive role, like we have, for example, with reopening the high streets, where we help and work with the districts, using our skills to bring those to fruition. And then the other aspect was evidence gathering, which was really about identifying the weaknesses, identifying the holes, and then disseminate the information, and then do that coordinating role with the districts, LEP and others, to make sure we filled those gaps in so they weren't left, and someone addressed them. However, what very early became very apparent, that collaboration and coordination was probably addressed in many respects through the GEGJC, which is why we're sitting here now. So a lot of our recovery plan, particularly around the coordination role, our collaborative role, support, and sort of part of that leadership, was really best, rather than reinvent the wheel, let GEGJC do that. So basically that's sort of morphed into almost our earlier plan, it was almost morphed really into the GEGJC plan really. So now we're reviewing our position, and it's still very much obviously around those same issues: leading, collaboration, coordination, support, evidence gathering, but with a focus around sectoral support. We can't address specific companies. What our role has got to be is about looking how we can raise the platform for others all to recover from. We don't even know what we're recovering from yet until furlough and other things unwind. Geographic intervention. For example, things like the Emergency Active Travel Plan, but also in particular big issues like the economy, the rural economy and connectivity. Demographic, another focus for us with adult ed, things like the 18 to 24-year-olds, reskilling and training, again, those issues. So that's really where our focus is going forward, I think. And obviously it's still about the collaborating, collecting and gathering that data to enable informed decisions going forward. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Colin. Right, just before we go to Lisa, does anybody have a comment on what we've heard so far? Anybody want to come in with a question or? Oh, Kevin.
Chair. Steve.
Steve Mawson.
Steve, yeah. I've got Kevin and then Steve. So I'll go Kevin first.
Thanks, Chair. It was quite strange. Last week, we put the safety zones down in the high street, and I was just walking through the high street to all the businesses. And what I found very strange, or very surprising, was footfall is down, but several of the shops are all reporting their takings up on this time last year. So what people are actually doing is the ones who are coming into the high street are coming in for reasons and are coming in to spend. So actually, I was quite surprised at that comment from them. One of the shops, I use an example, there was two shops. One was a coffee shop, so you would think that they would increase footfall, but their takings were up. And there was an area like M&Co that, their takings were up over 2 or 3 days. What other days that I was speaking to them. So I just wanted to add that in really, because that adds to Colin's point where are we starting from?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Steve, want to come in?
Yes, Chair. It was on your point earlier about, and Mike's point about best practice. One of the things, and for those that don't know, I also chair the LRF recovery group, which is actually around operational recovery rather than economic recovery. But one of the things that many areas have done is they've merged them together. They've merged together because they've kind of always thought, well, it's LRFs always deal with recovery. And I think we've been better suited not doing that. I think we've been better suited for listening to the local priorities, and chief execs and district leaders were very clear from early doors that they wanted that local emphasis on what is working in their local area and what they need to see happening in their local area, whilst also coming back to the work of this committee and, well, what do we do collectively? What can we do collectively that's better, and what collectively that we need to focus our attention on? So I think there's listening to all the comments this morning, there's a strength in that local option and the local activities that's taking place, and people knowing what business needs in their area, whilst there's also something we need to do collectively. And I think that's a challenge for us. That's going to be the challenge for us this morning in terms of how we do that bigger and better collective work.
Yeah, absolutely right, Steve. Hopefully, if we get it right, the sum of the parts will be worth far more than each of the individuals. So, well, anyway, let's move on. We've got Lisa McCants from Shared Intelligence. Lisa, are you there and ready? And I think you'll be presenting a PowerPoint thing as well. Are we all set with that?
Yeah, that's right. So I'll just make sure I can share that with you.
Sure, if sharing it, Lisa. Just check again.
Yeah, we can see a very busy desktop.
I know. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, we'll try again. I'm not seeing your file yet, Lisa. Not coming through. You may have to revert to just using the PowerPoint that has been emailed out to you. Nothing's come through, Lisa, from your screen.
Are you able to let me share my screen?
1 second.
Yeah, can you?
If I can share content, shall I see if this works?
That's it.
There we go.
Is that working? Yeah, can everybody
Perfect.
see that?
That's it. Well done.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let me just put it on slideshow so you can see it. So thank you all very much for having me today. I've been tasked with reviewing the recovery templates that have been produced across all of the partners in Gloucestershire. And I've also had a look at the published and draft documents where they are available. And to set the scene, I'm just going to cover a tiny bit about the economic framework pre-COVID, give a few snippets of the data in terms of what's been happening over the last couple of months, and then give you a bit of the analysis of the review of the plans, which seek to identify the strengths, the gaps, and some of the learning from other places. So probably not a big surprise to you, but there's obviously a number of strategies and plans that have existed across the county, particularly in a pre-COVID state. The Gloucestershire Vision for 2050, the draft local industrial strategy that the LEP's been producing in partnership, and also a number of plans at an individual district or borough level. And what's core through those plans as broad themes are inclusivity, sustainability, and retention of young people. And I think this framework that's emerged over the years has presented some particular challenges, such as areas of persistent high unemployment and deprivation, a number of health issues that feature in different parts of the county, which also are likely to have been made slightly worse by the pandemic. The need for some strong infrastructure improvements and the promotion of active travel, and also the need to really create some more affordable housing and quality jobs and opportunities for young people to attract and retain them in the county. And then equally, some of the opportunities that have emerged, particularly around your economic strengths, growth in agri-tech, growth in cyber, quite a strength in the advanced manufacturing sector, particularly in parts of Tewkesbury and Stroud, and high volume of employment in the visitor economy. So really key for different parts of that kind of service economy. And while that presents quite a simplistic view of the overall direction of travel, I think it's quite important to set the scene for that. So, in terms of the data that has been made available by HMRC and ONS, there are broadly three types of data that come from some more accurate positions, as opposed to lots of modelling and things that have happened by various organisations and think tanks. So furlough, the number of individuals or the number of residents that have been furloughed, some sector analysis on that to show where there are the greatest or lesser impacts, and some data on universal credits as well. So first of all, looking at furlough, I think it's worth mentioning that this relates specifically to residents. So the furlough data is by resident, not by workplace. So on the graph, you can see each of the districts listed, as well as the Gloucestershire total and England total figures. So this really is telling us at the moment that there's a slightly lower proportion of residents furloughed compared to your southwest counterparts, but a slightly higher proportion than the England average. And what's of note is that Cotswold and Forest of Dean seem to have the highest number of employees furloughed as a proportion of their total employment base, whereas Stroud and Gloucester have the lowest numbers. So just key in terms of setting the scene of where the challenges are. In relation to furlough impact by sector, a big caveat for this is that this is based on survey data, so it's not a holistic look at sectors and furlough across the country, and it does look at averages. So just it's as accurate as it could be for model data, but over time we suspect there'll be more information that comes out. And what this data particularly tells us is that accommodation and food services are most significantly or most likely to be significantly impacted, and Cheltenham and Cotswold in this particular circumstance seem to have a higher proportion of individuals working in those sectors. Manufacturing is also an area that's likely to be highly impacted, and again Tewkesbury and Stroud, high concentrations there, so that's quite an impact on them. And then wholesale and retail, as a general, as well as construction, have been seeing high levels of furloughed staff. Some of those are already starting to return to the workplace, and that seems to be spread quite broadly across the whole of the county. And I have done a chart of all of the sectors with the impact across each of the districts. I won't go into that into detail, but it's on the slide deck that have been shared with you, should you like to drill into a bit more of that detail. And then considering the impact on universal credits, so you'll see that there has been quite a steep increase, not just at a Gloucestershire level, but also at an England level over the last couple of months. I think there's been quite a high increase, but what you might not be able to see, because at the moment it might be behind someone's picture or someone's tile, is that it's starting to level off, and actually you're starting to see a bit of a decline. A couple of reasons for that. You'll get some individuals that are returning to work or increasing the number of hours that they work, so they'll be coming off that credit system. But depending on what happens with employment going forward, particularly with the numbers of people that have been furloughed who may in the longer term be made redundant, that figure may increase quite significantly. And I think what's also worth noting is with those figures, there's been a slower rate of those claiming in Gloucestershire compared to the England average. Stroud and Cotswolds have had lower rates of individuals going on to universal credits, whereas Gloucester itself has had a higher number. The 16 to 24-year-old age group seems to be disproportionately affected, which I think is a bit of an England-wide phenomenon, but it's obviously really key and very central to your plans itself. And as I mentioned, starting to fall, but obviously really key to make sure that you can keep an eye on that, because it's something that could increase quite significantly again in the future. So that broadly sets the scene in terms of the framework and what's happening in the data. The data is getting better and better month by month, so there are some more informations that are coming out on a regular basis, and very much worth keeping an eye on to help some of that more locality planning. And in terms of the recovery plans themselves, as I said, I've looked across all of the templates that were submitted, and I've read through all of the various documents in forms, whether that's published or in draft. And I think it's worth highlighting that there's a number of key opportunities for collaboration and key priorities that are coming across so far. And most of those have been mentioned by your officers over the last 45 minutes or so. But what is common is a priority around making sure that they can reopen high streets and get the retail environment back up and running, building in as much low carbon or green priority as possible, particularly so that the economy can grow in that direction going forward, which I think is a really strategic move on Gloucestershire's part. Considering the visitor economy, particularly around the numbers of individuals that are employed in that sector, or parts of those sectors. And at a locality level, there are some key areas that have jumped out of the plans. So we had a little bit about cyber in Golden Valley, as well as advanced manufacturing being very key to those. And then finally, really, that's jumping out of the plans is really around young people. So they're needing to be a focus on young people across the whole of the county. In terms of the strengths that have been identified across the plans, it's very much a similar list, which is very positive. So low carbon, visitor economy, and also housing and infrastructure seen as being really key, particularly in terms of affordable housing for younger people. As well as some of the infrastructure moves, promotion of active travel, and making sure that the movement of individuals is quite significant. And a couple of the opportunities that were identified across all of the areas include the need for greater collaboration and that need to redistribute the economy as far as it is possible to. And also to try and grow some of those cyber and green collar jobs excuse me, that exist or that are starting to grow and emerge even more strongly. And what features less strongly across the plans, and this is very much not intended as a criticism, it's very much a point in time. There's a lot of thinking going on and there's a lot of information coming out, so it's trying to keep up with that as much as possible. But in terms of some of the gaps, data and evidence. So the recently published information from the LEP is incredibly helpful in terms of understanding what the scale of the challenge might be, but also hearing firsthand from a lot of the businesses and sectors across the county. What's really important is that information continues to be circulated and produced, appreciating that some of the information won't be available for a good 12 to 18 months, particularly where we get information about business closures and redundancies. So really important to keep on top of that as far as possible. The digital divide, there's been fairly limited mention of this in terms of the plans. It's very much something that's at the forefront of each of the district's minds in terms of what needs to happen. But in terms of the detail that sits behind that, I think there's still quite a bit of thinking and work and collaboration to be done at that level. Similarly, in terms of the level of detail around young people and the skills required, So the relationships with schools and colleges, universities, and how that links to business and the emerging or future skills needs for that new economy. And then one thing again that seems to be coming out in dribs and drabs is in terms of the funding routes. So making sure that the county as a whole, with support and the LEP, can identify the funding routes, whether that's for individual businesses, for apprenticeship schemes, or whether that's something more holistic in terms of innovation funding for whole sectors. And then some other areas, there's few specific interventions labelled around visitor economy and advanced manufacturing, and this is totally appreciating that it's not necessarily known yet what exactly is going to happen in terms of those particular sectors. But given they're so strong across Gloucestershire, really important that they feature. Cyber being central to the Cheltenham Recovery Plan didn't feature as strongly in terms of other plans or as an opportunity for the future. So possibly there should be ways, or there could be ways to tie that into that challenge around the digital divide and the need to reskill or upskill individuals into that sector. The role of councils as anchor institutions, predominantly highlighted by the County Council's response so far, but definitely something that could feature more strongly, along with what might happen in the economy in terms of new ways of working, which very much opens up opportunities for some of your businesses in that cyber sector with the linked technologies, and trying to understand how that can come forward. But also appreciating the plethora of council assets, whether it's libraries or community centres, and having a look and a think about how they might be able to be repurposed going forward. Next section, so thinking about areas for collaboration. A lot of the work that's been done so far very much lends itself to stronger and greater collaboration for the future. There's already good practice or good living practice of this happening at the moment, and some of those areas that are jumping out are that transition to carbon neutrality, a green economic growth strategy, so seeing what can be done in terms of those green collar jobs, analysis of the business challenge that's coming through strongly from the LEP, an identification of some of the assets for modern industrial needs or modern workforce needs, how people are going to be slightly changing or altering the way they work, not necessarily driving into the office 9 to 5, but working in a very different reform. Understanding what flexibilities there might be within the regulatory system, really to open up the business environment and to support as much of that resilience going forward. And then I think one of the big challenges that everybody's considering is really around how to communicate all of this. I put myself in the shoes of somebody that had been furloughed in a local district in Gloucestershire, and had a look at all of the different websites and information that was available. It was a very, very confusing landscape. So seeing if there's anything that can be done really to pull some of this together and support your resident and business population. And then finally, just thinking about some of the learning that's happening elsewhere, or some of the initiatives that we've heard of in other work that we're doing. We understand that there's a couple of schemes that are being proposed to extend furlough within particular sectors. So some of the central London boroughs are looking at extended furlough schemes for some of the sectors such as hospitality, retail, considering a huge fall in tourism and a lack of people moving around and spending money in local economies. There's quite a bit of work going on through the Fab Lab network in terms of how they're supporting the repurposing of libraries to make them more fit for skills and employment or startup facilities. Digital Lead is another example. So they're very much looking at schemes to support digital enablement through the provision of not just machinery, but also access and how they can support individuals on the learning and development side. Various funding opportunities that are available. And then the final area, which is actually, I think, a very good report, is the Vanishing High Streets report that Grimsey's did, which comes up with some very real and kind of practical examples of how areas can support high streets and town centre locality activity. And then very finally, lots of funding announcements that have happened recently, which is very much kind of key to keep an eye on those. So there's vouchers for individual households which can support local construction or green construction businesses. New traineeship programs to try and encourage businesses to take on new members of staff, particularly from that 16 to 24 or 18 to 24 age group, loans and grants and packages of support for various sectors, so the arts and heritage, and then also some of the unspent EU funding, which I understand is quite significant across England. So again, are there any opportunities for pulling in more of that? So that's everything from me. I'll just stop sharing my screen and then hand back to the chair. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll just move the presenter back to me and then I can see hands. Okay. Terrific. Thank you, Lisa. I suppose we move on now to item 6, really, which is how we take on board what we've heard this morning. See if we've got any glaring gaps or any ideas on how best to go forward. So members of the committee, anybody want to start us off? Is that the sound of tumbleweed?
Sorry, Chair, I was a bit slow. I was just going to ask a question on that last bit, if I may. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Go on.
It's just really in terms of the localised furlough, which may be relevant to some of the things around here, clearly. Do we know what scale of funding is needed and who is paying for it?
Lisa?
So in terms of the numbers of overall people across Gloucestershire, you're talking somewhere between around the kind of 75,000 residents that are currently furloughed at that level. It's certainly possible to look at some numbers. There's a cap.
Sorry,
on the
I was thinking more in terms of, I think you referenced in central London, they are talking about localised furloughing. I wasn't sure what numbers they were talking about paying for and who was going to pay for it.
Okay, I don't know the number. I can certainly try and find out what quantum of funding that they're applying for, but it is bids to the legacy EU funding. So of that 750 odd million that needs to be spent by Christmas, that's been quite recently and widely reported, is trying to understand whether or not any of that can be drawn down for localised schemes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Lisa. Doina, to come in.
I thought no one seemed to be coming in, so I thought we may as well. Yeah, I just wanted to say that was really good, that presentation. It's really good to have someone have a look at what you've been trying to do, because in a sense we're all in this unknown world where we're not, we're trying to invent things with new challenges that we've never faced before. So I really appreciated that. And I really like the gaps that you've picked up on. And Brendan really just gave a sort of very overview of what we're trying to do. And there's a lot more detail in there. Some of the things I think you mentioned around an awareness of yourself as a council, of being a large organisation. We did actually have something in the brief that we're preparing around as an anchor institution, and we're looking to work with others in our district. So we have picked up on that. But some of the other stuff you've mentioned is really important. So just to thank you, really. I think I'll take that away. I've got a meeting this afternoon to look at our draft around our economy work. So that's going to be extremely useful. I think I just wanted to make the point that, we talk about the economy, but I think sometimes we need to look at the wider picture as well, and not see it as divorced from all the other stuff around health and well-being. I mean, just to give you some practical examples, I'm sure you're all aware, as I am, of individuals who previously were leading very active lives out there in the community through work and all the rest of it, who are now too frightened to leave their homes. And so I think we need to see it in the round as well. So if that individual who used to go to work, who used to go and have a coffee, now isn't, if you multiply that by many thousands, that's also having an impact. So I think we need to see that our community work, our health and wellbeing work, and all the rest of it is also linked to the stuff around the economy. And if we don't do work there as well, we're always going to have difficulties, certainly in the months to come. So I think we've got these different work streams as a council, but I think we can't see them all in isolation from each other. I think we need to see the economy as like an ecosystem, if you like, where everything impacts. And there's some, real concerns about the mental impact that we're seeing in this crisis. Some people are absolutely desperate to get back. Others are really concerned. And often those people who are concerned are the sorts of people who've got the disposable income to go out and support their communities. So, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to hear from all your different examples and sort of how they're all sort of complementing each other. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Dinah. Yeah, you bring up some very important points there. Rob, you've got your hand up. Robert?
Yeah. Just a couple of general points, really. And I think, listening to what Lisa had to say, she talked about the numbers involved in furloughing and all that sort of stuff. And she did at some point in that talk about people now being made redundant who previously been on furlough. And that is now happening quite significantly. People are now starting to be made redundant rather than being paid to nominally be at work, if you like. And I think that is a huge crisis at the moment. And one of the things that is causing that whole problem is this overall climate of fear about going out, back to work, going out into and doing what we would normally do. And I wonder if we as authorities really should be now broadcasting the message that it's safe to go out, it's safe to go back to work, and we should be pushing that as in the way that, whatever way that we can, that it is safe to go out, because people's jobs are at stake here as a result of that, and people are now losing their jobs. I know quite a few personally, as it happens, and so it really bothers me that we're talking about recovery planning based on the kind of sectors that we are used to dealing with, but everywhere is under threat. Every job is under threat. One of the big potential problems is the move to internet working quite dramatically in the last 3 or 4 months means, of course, that it's very easy now to make people redundant and employ other people in other parts of the globe to do those jobs if they can do them on the internet. And we don't seem to be thinking about that at all. There is the potential for a huge swathe of typically middle-class office-based workers to find that they haven't got a job anymore in certainly the medium term, possibly the short term. So in our recovery thoughts, we should be thinking about that as a source of as a problem, if you like. And the trouble for all of us at the moment is everybody has got no, not everybody, sorry, but a lot of people have got used to doing what we're doing now, and it suits a lot of people. But there are potential consequences to that I don't think anybody's really thought through. We could be the authors of our own destruction in this context, as far as work and earning money is concerned, because that's the key at the end of the day. It's actually earning money, not having money, but earning it. And so how do we address those issues about doing whatever we can? At the end of the day, we're not government, we are local authorities. We have limited ability to act, limited resources. Of course, we do lots of good things, and we should improve on that where we can. So what can we do to encourage people to think very carefully about the situation that we're now in, and to move on to a new world, and getting out and getting back to doing the things that create an economic momentum. So I probably rambled on enough. Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll leave you with those thoughts.
Thank you, Rob. I think you do actually make two very, very important points. The first one about communication. We do need to be able to have a clear line on this and communicate what we're going to do and what we can do and what our plans are. I think we've seen recently that muddled messages don't help in any way, shape or form. So I think to have a coordinated message about what we're doing and all being together is vital. And I think you're absolutely right, as Colin mentioned earlier in the meeting. We still don't know what it is that we're going to be recovering from yet. The fallout is yet to really happen. And I think you are absolutely right. It is a changing landscape. And we don't really understand what the full consequences of that change will be. And that, again, is why we across the county need to be flexible enough that we can pick up on issues as they arise and do what we can to try and mitigate those effects. But I think you're absolutely right. Steve, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yes, just some more comments, if I may, and I guess following up what Rob was saying, I think, and this is where it's quite tricky, but it's an entirely fair point about trying to reassure people that we're there to support and make it a safe environment, etc., which is clearly what a lot of the work around the high street, etc., has been doing. The difficulty is actually judging what the future is. As you say, we don't necessarily know entirely what we're recovering from. So on the one hand, there will be changes that are just accelerated. So things that were happening anyway, that the last few months have accelerated. And I think meetings like this is a case in point, because I think I don't want an environment where this is the only way of meeting people. I think we need to revert to face-to-face, because I think that's still useful. But using this type of meeting is massively advantageous. We're getting much bigger turnouts for things than we ever used to do for some meetings, where you had to go to a physical point in place and point in time to have a meeting. So I think maybe some sort of hybrid structure where we're maximising the use of technology is in to stay. I can't see this being reversed completely by any means. But equally, there are things like, I think of like the theatre, where at the moment they're still shut. But I think people still value a theatre experience when they're reopened, but that will need reassurance. So I think that's still a valuable thing for the future. So some businesses, unfortunately, will cease to exist because we've moved away from using them, whereas others are perfectly viable, provided that people do get the reassurance and then can go back to use them. And I think the difficulty we've got is trying to judge which is which. So I think that's going to be an important part of the thinking process. So particularly, I think the sort of localised furlough sounds quite attractive, because I think there will be businesses and industries where we may be keen to support, provided there's the funding, which is the difficult bit. And we don't have the funding necessarily, I suspect. Because going back to the other point, another point that was being made was this thing about councils being sort of anchor organisations. So I think that is very much where we can contribute, and is what we've been trying to do. But I know in our case, and I think I mentioned at the previous one of these, we've had to put our High Street Phase 2 investment, sort of £2 million upgrade for another section of the High Street, to create more sort of usable space and event space. That's gone on hold because we don't know if we've got the funding at the moment to actually crack on and do it. So if we could do it, I think that's to everyone's advantage, but we don't know. So in our role as being anchor organisations, our own financial situation clearly is part of that equation, because until we're assured of that, we can't maximise our value to the wider community with that role. Now, hopefully we're getting gradual clarity on that, what we do and don't have. One of the big sectors that's still unclear is leisure, where I think government are somewhat confused at the moment as to what they're assisting and what they're not assisting, which hopefully we'll get further clarity shortly. But I think there are very good points being made, and I think anchor role is something we can very much build on, provided we get that assurance on future funding.
Thank you, Steve. I think you make some very good points as well. Does any other member of the committee want to make any comments at this time? No. Rob, do you want to come back?
Chair, yeah, I would, if you wouldn't mind, just to come back to thanks to Steve there for what he's just said. And I was just going to pick up on something he said about knowing which ones will survive and which ones won't. And, I don't know specifically what he had in mind there, but I don't think we, in our roles, are able to know what businesses will survive and what businesses will not. And it goes back to this point of, public authorities can't pick winners in business. What we can do is try to facilitate the their the situation where they can survive and can grow if they've got themselves set up right. It's just that point really. We need to think more. We need to think broadly rather than specifically. Even I know we're very fond of doing sector analysis, and I understand why, but. At the moment, and I said I look at those sectors, and this is no disrespect to the work, but it's just, are we, just focusing on certain things that we're used to focusing on? And so, to go back to what can we do as authorities in our capacity, and clearly communication about the wider context is one thing. Responding to authorities about responding to businesses where they're saying, look, these are the difficulties that we face in rules and regulations, in planning matters. We haven't talked about planning at all, for example. Where can we businesses now in our role as local planning authorities? And it's only just as I've started to talk and we thought that's a huge area, isn't it? How can we facilitate? The world is going to change. We've just said that as far as businesses are concerned. So what can we do to help where we don't know what the help is, but we are in charge of certain things like planning and all the rules and regulations that go with that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Does any other member of the committee want to come in on the comment? If not, officers, do you want to maybe come in and see how we might shape the recovery process going forward from what we've heard? Anybody want to speak?
Chair, do you want me to make a few comments?
Yes, please.
Okay. I mean, I had a look at the plans like Lisa over the weekend and where we are and picked up the various bits of commonality and areas we're working together. I ended up, funny enough, coming up with two C words, which was one around communications and one about collaboration, which have come up a lot this morning. It's a question for members around communication. The joint committee in the past has not done a lot of joint communications out to the public or to businesses and the like. I wondered if this was a time when perhaps we could do something, particularly around things that we've all done together and done, I would like to think, quite well. We've all done slightly different things, but one thing we have been doing together with the support of the county is around the high street work and facilitating the support of opening safely of our town centres. We are also looking now at a range of common principles and common priorities, I guess. So there may be something around things that we've done, things that we are going to do and plan to do. I don't know, maybe something around things we want to do. But there feels like a joint statement may help. Now, I just also wondered, as part of that communication, whether there are any additional quick wins we might like to put in there. One was very much picked up, I think, from Rob Bird and Steve Jordan around reassurance. And there were one or two elements in the plans, Chair, where people have put in about shop local. And the LEPS plan features that, and a number of other plans do that, almost on the basis, not just shop, but use the facilities that you've got, your pubs, your restaurants and your high street premises, almost on the basis of use it or lose it, because it becomes quite important to support businesses there in a safe way. So picking up Steve's point about not just saying willy-nilly come in, we want to reassure you that, if you follow the right guidance, it's as safe as it can be, but we do need people to shop local and use facilities. So there may be a message around that from the joint committee, and maybe that might be a sort of quick win across the piece sort of initial campaign. I don't know, around high streets that maybe we could work with the LEP. Because it is part of their plan. Having done the work to get the high streets and town centres as safe as we can we now take that on forward to say, okay, folks, now's the time you need to be thinking about safe use of your various facilities. Get out and use them, because if you don't, they may not be there for very long. And so there may be a message around that. There's also a message around our future priorities. Lisa's already mentioned those, about half a dozen priorities which we are all going to focus on and look at. So there may be something around the message around communicating that. May not be in just one, but it may be a series of things we could look at doing. So I'd be interested in members' comments about, because we're all communicating individually about our plans. Does the committee wish, with the LEP, to do some joint work around communications about what we are trying to do to support our businesses and support our economy and help people to get out there and enjoy great Gloucestershire? And then the other bit was around the collaboration and some of the points that have already been made. There's a potential for greater collaboration. One thing the committee could do, Chair, from this is ask the senior officer group and to go away and do more work on those areas and bring a report back to your next meeting, having got the plans to where they are now, and come back with some definite proposals for areas that we will work together, as opposed to the areas where we have the sense of place and we're doing locally, and maybe not necessarily produce some form of county plan. I think we talked about, members were a little bit nervous about another plan, but there might be maybe a committee action list or list of activities where we do decide to collaborate, that we could bring that back for members to consider. So those would be the two areas maybe I would suggest might be worth looking at. One around communications, getting the message across. What is the message that comes out of the committee collectively? And when I say that, I mean with the LEP as well. Is there anything we could work on initially to take that forward? And that might be around using our local facilities, our town centres, our shops, pubs, and in a safe way. And then just almost saying to business, the committee is working on this to try and support you, and these are the priorities that we want to do. And almost you could ask businesses in the way that the LEP have done, is there anything else that you'd like us to look at as a joint committee, and do a bit of consultation and bring that back. So those were my initial thoughts listening to the discussions this morning, and also having a look at the plans. So some work for the officer group. If you were to communicate, there could be a message that just comes out from the joint committee signed by all the leaders and the chair of the LEP on these things. Some things might need more work, but that was just my initial thoughts, and I'd be grateful for members' comments on that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think this is a great opportunity for the committee to actually show some of that county-wide leadership, if you like, and the fact that we are in this together and working hard on it. I think the plans from each of the individual districts are great on that local level. I think Lisa's done a brilliant job of bringing those together and looking at where the gaps are and the opportunities. And I think it is about, personally, I think it is about the officers now taking that away, just as you've said, Mike, and actually seeing how we can make that a cohesive action plan, if you like, going forward. I've got Richard Cooks with your hand up. Richard, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that we can really help on is around the area of jobs and skills and apprenticeships going forward. We are expecting something like 23,000 people to be made redundant over the next 12 to 18 months. And we've really got to start emphasising how we're going to get them back into employment in the shortest possible period of time. So we need to be focusing on further education opportunities or apprenticeships, or simply finding new job opportunities for them within all of the districts and within the county. I know that the MP in Gloucester is planning a jobs fair in September, and I'm hopeful that the City Council will be supporting that very much in terms of providing apprenticeships. I hope that the county will also be prepared to support that, and a number of other businesses in the area. Our entire focus has been working with businesses in Gloucester to try and ensure that we rebuild some confidence. And that's another C that can be added into this, along with communication and collaboration. It is important to get confidence restored, but it's also important to recognise that there is a balance as far as confidence, in that we shouldn't become overconfident and create another Leicester of the county. We don't want to have everybody so overconfident about the situation that we end up increasing the rates of COVID so high that we end up being locked down again. So confidence, it's really important to balance. I don't think there's any more I can say, except I think we should be looking very hard at how we can reskill the people who are going to be made redundant over the next years. I suppose one other thing I'd like to point out, though, is that we have to separate short-term and long-term thinking. In Gloucester, we have a city centre which has been almost entirely focused on retail, and that's something that we're losing now. Retail is not something that's going to be geographical anymore. It's going to be widespread. We're all learning the habits of buying from Amazon and eBay and something like that. So we have to repurpose our city centres or our town centres and bring in a lot more people to live in there. And that's the purpose of our city centre commission, to try and rebalance the role of the city centre over the long term, and that's all part of building confidence in a long-term future. The regeneration that we're continuing to do in King's Quarter, in King's Square, is giving confidence to people to potentially come and live there, and certainly shop and make use of those as a heritage and historical asset.
Thank you, Richard. Very good. Doina, your hand is up. Did you want to come in, or is that from before?
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I think it was from before. Apologies.
All right, then. All right. Steve, your hand is up. Do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Joe. Just to endorse that, both in terms of the suggestion, because I think as a way forward, having a discussion around where we do have, because as you say, we're all communicating at our own level, but there is that shared level of comms that we can have on the shared messages, which is important. And from my point, even more importantly, the shared actions that we need to take. So picking up Mike's point, I'd certainly endorse that. And indeed, Richard's point, because one of the questions I was keen to understand was, given the vital nature, even more so than ever, that having the right skills at the right place, where is the skills board on this? Has it got the capacity to do what is necessary? Because there are some concerns about its resourcing. How does it link into this process? Because I think it will be even more essential going forward.
I think that's a very important point there. We know we've got Pete Carr with us. Hi, Pete. Did you want to come in at all on this? Just certainly on the sort of skills element?
Sure. I totally agree with the points you're making, Steve and Richard. I think it's. Can I just check everyone can hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yep. Okay. Totally agree with the points made there. I think where we're at the moment is really just trying to look at exactly what sort of collaboration can actually be done to make things like the apprenticeship support and the skills retraining for sectors work. A big part of it, as you'll appreciate, is actually knowing what we're retraining people for. So we need to understand the growth sectors, the opportunities for particular job roles that are growing in the county. So there's some analysis work that we're doing on that at the moment. We're doing some work with the National Careers Service to actually make sure that we're working collaboratively with them so that they can support anyone that's either at risk of being made redundant or actually is worried about that from a furlough perspective. So yeah, there's a lot of work that's going on, and inevitably there's been a dip in apprenticeships because it's not a priority for a lot of businesses. We've got to remember that apprenticeships are jobs. And they are being affected in the same way as other jobs. So the training providers are very geared up to provide those apprenticeship opportunities. And obviously, there's the recent announcement of the employer incentive as well to support that. So I think a in summary, there's a lot of work kind of going on behind the scenes at the moment around mapping out and knitting together the national incentives, national programs. Lisa mentioned about the Kickstart program that DWP have started, and the kind of greater number of work coaches. So, you know, we're working across all of that at the moment. Steve, you were asking about kind of what the resource that the Skills Advisory Panel has. Yes, there is still a question on that because it doesn't have a resource to deliver these programs. Neither does the LEP, neither does the County Council. You know, what we're doing on this is having to do it through negotiation and through working with partner organisations like training providers. So there isn't a fund to support this at the moment. That might be something that this committee wants to consider in terms of that, but I think part of it, you know, needs to be on the basis of exactly what's needed and developing more of an action plan.
Thank you, Pete.
Can I just a quick comment on that? Because I entirely understand we need to be linking into the national programmes, but I think some of these local programmes are going to be massively important at the moment, whether it's cyber or anything else. The ones that we know are our niche markets that are expanding and where we need to be in there. So I'd be more than happy to look at what resourcing may be required going. I mean, assuming we can come up with something to understand what resourcing might be useful, given, as you say, been sort of operating on a shoestring in effect up to now.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Rob, I've got your hand up. Doiner, I've seen your hand. Don't worry, I'll bring you in. But Rob, is your hand up again?
Yeah, it is actually. Thank you, Chair. And I apologise. I'll keep this quick. I don't want you to think that I'm repeating myself here, but it's just we're having a conversation, and I'm developing some things in my head. And you know, the theme that I started with, which is about regulations as authorities, and I would like to see us, you know, have an element in our recovery thinking about regulations and what we're responsible for in that regard, and what can we do. You know, at the end of the day, regulations equal cost to a lot of businesses, and for existing businesses, we're talking about some are on the brink. That might be the tipping point. We're also looking. We know that businesses are going to have to change and do things differently, and you know, if they haven't got that capacity to change because of regulation, well, that means they won't be able to do that, and that will falter. I'm aware, and I'm just speaking without any detailed knowledge, but I think in Cheltenham, for example, they did some stuff about outdoor events a while back in order to free up their planning regime, if you like. I don't know quite what you did, Steve, but you know, and it's that sort of thing. You know, we need to look at our regulatory environment and think, you know, what are we doing here that's probably there for a historic reason and other things, but is it necessary now? Thank you.
Just a very quick comment if I may, because I think it's, as Rob rightly says, we did do something probably a month or so back now, but the government have pinched most of that, and that's in the legislation that's currently being whipped through. I think, I'm not sure if it's still in the Lords or not, or whether it's come out or not, but I think I entirely agree, that's definitely an area we should be looking at. But it's only based on the new government legislation because it gives opportunities there.
Thank you, Steve. Angela, I've just seen your hand pop up. Is it pertinent to this point, or?
Yes, I think Rob's made some really good points about that. What can we do through the LPAs could enable and support? So there's obviously the considering you know, the reuse of flexible policies for maybe office space, because obviously a lot of the LEP C&I group, there was a lot of discussion about you know, from the agents about, you know, tenants, sort of landlords looking at making appropriate investments into their buildings to repurpose them to encourage people to come into towns and things like that. So I think there's a good role that the LPAs can make in a positive way to work with landowners, tenants and things to look at that area. But one particular area that I'm kind of involved with, connectivity, you know, there's a current consultation out for planning reforms, and one in particular relates to radio masks. You know, there's a big investment by all the mobile operators called the Shared Rural Network, and it's going to significantly enhance the 4G. Now, at the moment, they're calling for more development rights to enable them to repurpose the masts that are currently up, add to them, but also put new ones. And I think a lot of, obviously, communities don't like that in their areas, but I think there's a role in the connectivity and digital agenda where I would certainly encourage, the local planning authorities to work with Mobile UK and the operators to ensure that the right infrastructure is put into Gloucestershire to actually make us have better connectivity, mobile connectivity, particularly in the rural areas. So that's kind of a piece of regime that it's going through planning reform. But I think that's where, as Rob's point, we can actively work with those operators to make it a lot easier to get that investment in Gloucestershire, and they will come and focus on our area before other areas in the UK. So I really commend what Rob is saying.
Terrific, thank you, Angela. Donna, do you want to come in now? Is it you on this point? Or?
Yeah, it was in relation to the skills, and I think, and I was pleased. I can't remember who it was who was speaking now. It was it was around the lack of resources, which I find really concerning. And I just wanted to support what Steve was saying. That I think the suggestion around some work being done by officers, I think we need to take that away as a message. I think my real concern is if the economy and all the recovery plans become extremely top heavy. And really, certainly in the immediacy, all the stuff we're talking about, people losing their jobs, it needs to be really people focused, and what we can do, that some interventions that can be done more quickly around retraining and also support. There'll be people losing their jobs who maybe have been in those jobs, let's say, since they left school. I know anecdotally I've heard about that in the district. They may need just basic help, support with interview skills, CV writing. So you have to start with a whole spectrum of support. Maybe they don't have great access to the internet. So, I would really support looking at how we could resource that better, because there may be some earlier on interventions that we can make now. Obviously, there's other stuff we're talking about, but a lot of that is more long-term, about building things. I don't want this all to be about building stuff. Some of this has got to be about quick things that we can do now to support individuals to reskill themselves. There'll be some highly skilled people coming into the jobs market. How do we help them to find their way to something new? So if that's a piece of work that we can take away from today, I think that's something as a district. I know it sits more with the county council, but I think it can complement some of the stuff that we're doing as well. So I'd really support that.
Terrific, thank you.
It was Pete. Sorry, Pete. I've just realised it was you who spoke. So,
no, that's fine.
See you there now.
Terrific. Okay, thank you, Pete. Do you want to come in?
Just to say thanks for that, Doina. I definitely agree that I think there's a lot of work that we could do more closely now with the district. So, partly from my point of view, it was trying to sort of understand, what the place-based plans were going to be focused on in terms of the sort of speed of response. Absolutely, support that. I think the question for me is really how we coordinate that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who raised it, but I think it was Lisa. But just talking about how we communicate that as well, because I think it's very, very confusing for somebody who is facing the end of furlough, facing redundancy. How what do I do? How do I get that help? And at the moment, we haven't. I think a big part of it is actually having some sort of central route to provide that information, rather than kind of multiple routes, and then coordination of the providers. So just as an example, with adult education in the county at the moment, the colleges get significantly larger budget, for example, than Gloucestershire County Councils adult education, but combined, I think we're able to play to all our strengths. I've certainly encouraged the adult ed team in Gloucestershire County Council to focus on, things like setting up a new business type courses, the employability support that you were talking about in terms of, building CV, looking at transferable skills, interview skills, etc. And then, some of the work around sort of transferring skills, actually going into new work based on gaining other qualifications. So I think a lot of it is a case of just working with the training providers on that and having a consistent offer that then applies across the county. Sorry, a long-winded answer, but hopefully that made some sense.
Terrific, thank you, Pete. I've got Simon Excel and then Mike Dawson. Simon?
Thanks, Chair. Something which I expected Colin to raise in his summary early for the County Council and didn't. So Colin's had to disappear, unfortunately, to a hospital appointment. It's about strategic infrastructure. Now, back in March, pre-COVID or pre the reality of COVID, we had some wonderful news from the government in terms of about £1 billion worth of strategic infrastructure. And that was M5 junction 10, that was M5 junction 9, and that was the A417 missing link. And I didn't want the committee to think that those 3 projects, and indeed a plethora of other strategic infrastructure projects, have been put on hold, because that's very much not the case. As part, I think, of the future comms, which I think it was Mike Dawson suggested, between what I hope will be the 7 local planning authorities and the LEP, I think we ought to have a key section in there about how we're hoping to build ourselves out of what we're in at the moment in terms of the recovery, how we're progressing those 3 key strategic infrastructure projects, and probably list some others as well. There's Gloucester Southwest bypass, there's the £22 million West Cheltenham and cyber transport improvements, and the list goes on and on. So I would just hope that we can work as an officer group behind the scenes and ensure that those schemes which are progressing to a greater or lesser degree, some of which have unfortunately been delayed due to COVID, but all are still progressing. So I just wanted to make the committee aware of what's happening perhaps behind the scenes in that respect. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Simon. Mike.
Chair, I was just going to pick up on a few of the comments that have been made in the last few minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Firstly, around the planning flexibilities and the like, we already have a piece of work, a work stream running, which we've been doing now for a little while, which was the removing barriers to development. And Philippa, I think, is now leading that piece of work with planning colleagues, following Annette Roberts leaving the county. I wondered whether the new legislation and the need for making sure that we don't put planning barriers in place, whether the group could be asked by the committee to do some work to look at the new legislation and make sure across the county we've got a consistent approach to the new legislation where that's appropriate. So that was my first thought in picking up Councillor Bird's comments around that maybe that officer group could pick that one up and have a good look at it and bring something back in terms of that. Removing those barriers really and getting the consistency. The comment about funding, I guess at the minute we're still developing the plans, so the funding issue is probably yet to come out. But if across the county we do have a piece of work that we want to do, but there's not the resources available currently to do it, then that's a discussion for the committee to decide whether one way or another we can put some resources together to support some work that the committee agrees is crucial. And given the fact that skills, education and young people have been mentioned a lot this morning, and Pete's been talking about that could be one area where the committee might wish to support some additional resource. I think that's for a future discussion. For Pete, what I would suggest is maybe you'd be great for you to come to the senior officer group to have some of those discussions about how we can work through that with you and maybe support. So I think that would be a good way forward on that particular one. I think in terms of the stuff that we were just talking about from Simon, that's absolutely crucial. In fact, most of our plans have a line in them about continuing to support growth. In other words, continuing to do the things that we were going to do anyway, but they've become really, really important because they will provide jobs, they will provide support for the economy. So I think that is a very, very important area around that. And, Cheltenham's already flagged up the cyber park and the Golden Valley development there. So I think there's quite a lot of stuff to be communicated if members wish to do that in terms of the messages from the committee about how we are trying to work together to reduce the impact of the COVID tail, if that's the way. And it's going to go on for a while, but members are happy with that. I'm sure there are some messages that we could pick up and look to communicate out over the coming weeks. Thank you, Chair.
Terrific. Thank you, Mike. Does anybody else want to come in? Kevin, have you got any comments from scrutiny from what you've heard?
It's just, and obviously there's been a plethora of comments today, and obviously it would be useful to then, obviously the scrutiny committee, to find out which ones are going forward at what rate, because obviously it's pointless us trying to scrutinise absolutely everything when there's only going to be some things that are going to prioritise, some things that are going to drop off, and whatever else. It would be useful for the meeting to find out from all these comments what it is you're going to prioritise and what it is you aren't going to prioritise. Sorry, bad English. To do that, I mean, the one thing I have noticed from a lot of the comments, if I'm going to be personal about this, is obviously you've got to bear in mind that we are authorities and we've got to make sure that we deliver what we as authorities can deliver, not necessarily get involved in stuff that it's much harder for us as authorities to get involved in. Make sure, like for instance, making things easier for businesses to get going again. Planning issues, regulation issues. Those are the sort of things that authorities we can do because we're well known for making things complicated. Well, we need to make sure that we uncomplicate things nowadays for these businesses to progress. But obviously it would be very interesting as a scrutiny committee to know what it is we are going to prioritise and in what order we're going to do things. Almost we need a recovery plan and development plan on what priorities and what order you're going to do things in.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, Richard. Do you want to come in, Richard?
Thank you, Chair. I think that the point that's just been made by Kevin is very apt. I think we've got to be totally realistic about our ability here to influence what's going on. The government have been probably too successful in scaring the hell out of people to the extent where a lot of people won't come out of their houses now. So the confidence factor is probably out of our capabilities. I think also we need to be aware of the other elephant in the room, which is the Brexit negotiations or lack of progress and the likelihood that we will be leaving the European Union without any kind of deal, which will have huge implications across the country. So I tend to think, let's be realistic. We've got a huge tsunami of job losses coming as a result of both of these things. And I think we just need to, in many ways, keep our powder dry and try and influence the areas where we can. So that would be my comment is I hear a lot of great thoughts about wouldn't in an ideal world we should do this, we should do that, we should do the other. But I think we've got to keep our feet on the ground, realise what's coming our way and focus on the things that we can change. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've had some very, very good comments. Unless anybody else wants to speak, I think we might just start to wrap this up then. I think Mike's given us a good way forward in that the officer group take away all the individual plans and work with the LEP and Lisa's paper as well about the opportunities, threats and all the rest of it, and come back with a report for our September meeting. I think that would be the plan. I think we've got a kind of theme based around 3 C's, collaboration and the areas where we can really collaborate together to make most impact. Communication, I think that is actually a very strong suit that we really do need to pick our game up on as a committee so that we can show some leadership and give some positive messages out. And the idea of trying to inject some sort of confidence. I take on board Richard's point he's just made now, but somewhere in there we've got to show leadership and confidence that we're doing the right thing and putting the right things in place. So we are, as we've said, we're right at the beginning of this process, not quite sure what it is that will be emerging, but things will be going on over the next few months. So if everybody's happy with that, so I'd ask, there's still some hands up, but I think they've all spoken. If anybody else wants to comment, then I think The idea is that we let Mike and the senior officer group take away our comments, take away the plans, and see if they can formulate an action plan for our next meeting. Mike, is that about right?
That's fine, and that is something we can do. We'll pick up from all the points that have been made about priorities, and also the fact we can't do this as one big bang, and the like, to try and draft something. And we won't look to duplicate what's happening at local level. I like the 3 C's, Chairman. Just on the communications, if you would like the officers to try from today's meeting to draft a press release picking up some of the points we have made, we would be happy to try and do that, but that would be from all the leaders, I think, really, or at least members of the joint committee, and we could circulate that within the next week or so. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Mike. So on that basis, does anybody else want to add anything before we wrap it up? No, everybody happy? Well, it's just for me then to say thank you very much, everybody, for coming on. It's been a very interesting meeting. Obviously, we are in strange times, but it's at strange times that organisations like us really need to step up the plate and show some leadership to try and guide us all through this weird times and what will become the new normal, whatever that ends up being, really. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. Our next meeting is the 16th of September, and then there's another meeting on the 18th. I'd like to thank all the officers for all the hard work and input they've put into this. Thank Lisa as well for her work. And let's try and move forward, as I say, with collaboration, communication, and confidence. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you at the next meeting.
Thanks all.
So are we off record now? Joe, are you still there? Can't. Joe, you're on mute.